letting you know that today's episode is a solo episode. Hi there, welcome back to the BARROW Podcast. Today's episode is going to be a solo episode, so it's just me. This is to allow mum some space to read, and also because there's a few things that, I might just want to talk about. I don't really need to rope mum into reading more books in order to talk about those things. So I don't know how common these kinds of episodes will be, but we'll see how we go, okay? It's definitely a lot harder to do by yourself than with someone next to you to sort of prompt you. So, yeah, let's give this a go. So today I want to talk about a book called The Uptown Local by Cory Leadbeater. Last week we looked at Joan Didion's, not last week, but the last book show episode we looked at Joan Didion's Blue Nights. And that got me thinking about this memoir, The Uptown Local by Cory Leadbeater. The extended title is The Uptown Local, Joy, Death, and Joan Didion. And I'm just going to read the blurb so you get a sense of what this is all about. As an aspiring novelist in his early 20s, Cory Leadbeater was presented with an opportunity to work for a well-known writer whose identity was kept confidential. Since the tumultuous days of childhood, Cory had sought refuge from the rougher parts of life in the pages of books. Suddenly, he found himself the personal assistant to a titan of literature, Joan Didion. In the 9 years that followed, Cory shared Joan's rarefied world, transformed not only by her blazing intellect, but by her generous friendship and mentorship. Together, they recited poetry in the mornings, dined with Supreme Court justices, attended art openings, smoked a single cigarette before bed. But secretly, Cory was spiraling. He reeled from the death of a close friend. He spent his weekends at a federal prison, visiting his father as he served time for fraud. He struggled day after day to write the novel that would validate him as a real writer. And meanwhile, the forces of addiction and depression loomed large. In hypnotic prose that pulses with life and longing, The Uptown Local explores the fault lines of class, family, loss, and creativity. It is a love letter to a cultural icon and a moving testament to the relationships that sustain us in the eternal pursuit of a life worth living. So if you like Joan Didion, then this is an interesting book that's going to give you a little bit more insight into her life. As the blurb attests, Cory basically, became Joan's PA and a live-in assistant throughout a period of his life where his personal life was kind of spiraling and falling apart. For me, it's that thing of some books you feel as if they've been written just for you, and that's sometimes the mark of a really good book or a really special book, the kind of book that's going to be, significant to us on a personal level. So, to say that I found this book relatable is something of an understatement. And in terms of where it sits with what Mum and I are doing, well, of course, with what Mum and I are doing, there is Mum's story, and then there's my story. And so I'm still working on my story, and I'm also searching for books that, can help me along as a writer. And this was one of the books that that spoke to me. And I'm going to make a couple more recommendations today. And occasionally I might do this where I throw in a few extra titles or books that I've come across that are worth noting, but that I'm not going to do, or we're not going to do an entire episode on. Okay, so I love this book. I loved The Uptown Local because it talks about many of the things that Mum and I are interested in and that I'm interested in individually, which is social class, but the pitfalls of pretensions and aspirations, or rather the pretension of aspiration itself. The Uptown Local is a powerful evocation of the animosity between father and son. And it's also about desire. So wanting to become quote unquote elite, wanting to join a new crowd and sort of expand or recreate or remake your identity. And it's a book that's about the awkwardness of the social climb, about aspiration, as I say. So some of the passages in here speak to that. I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the beginning of chapter 8, which is talking about food. Something odd comes now. Food. Food, as much as anything else, stands out about this period of my life. Later, when I would meet and fall in love with Liz, and she would take various jobs writing about food, when we would get to eat for free at restaurants we could never afford, it was then that I would really learn to cook, to shop, to experience and enjoy what was delicious. But in my early days with Joan, I was simply a newly admitted member of a select club who seemed to know inherently what good food was and to enjoy it. I had all my adult life starved myself, one of many systems designed to control the uncontrollable, to refute the idea in the main that I was a person, that I had a body, that I was here, truly here. But now I was learning. With Joan, I ate fish baked in parchment paper with olives and capers. I ate albondigas and pozole verde. I ate lamb. I ate chicken adobo. For lunch, we had buttery prosciutto on brioche from St. Ambrose, or salami with olive tapenade from Quadrano. Joan was built like a bird her entire life, but she had the palate of a glutton. She ate marvelously. She loved Dover sole from the Carlisle. She loved steaks. She loved fried chicken. She loved more than almost anything else Chinese food from Shun Li. When our meals concluded, she ate vanilla ice cream with a fork. What I found really interesting about this was Cory's journey, or Mr. Leadbeater's journey, beginning to integrate with, kind of high society, sort of an elite class of people, and how food was part of that journey. And I've always been interested in the intersection between social class and various things. Social class and mental health is something I find fascinating. But social class as it pertains to food and what food represents when you're learning, when you're expanding and growing in the world. Food was always a big part of my life, and certainly learning to eat different things that were different to the background I'd come from. That really resonated with me, obviously. And maybe that resonates with you. So on a personal level, I too kind of weaponized education and the pursuit of becoming a published author. And I weaponized these things to distance myself from my family and from their past, to create separation and to form a hierarchy of superiority via a proximity to culture and to the accumulation of cultural capital. Leadbeater is brilliant on all of this stuff. He really doesn't hold back or go easy on himself. He is, absolutely okay with aiming his focus at his own pretension and his own, aspirations and social climbing endeavors. And in the process, he locates some really, really painful truths about the human condition. He also locates how pain can make us harsh and how vulnerable some of us are behind our deliberately constructed exteriors. Okay, how vulnerable we might be to things like persuasion, and how vulnerable we are in love and in relationships as a result, when we're seeking love and we're seeking to make a new world for ourselves. And he's conflicted on the point of his father in particular. His father's in prison for tax fraud, and he wants to create this separation. He wants distance himself, and yet at the same time he's undeniably connected to his family and to his father. And he talks about the I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, but the one of the difficulties that writers might face in terms of there's almost nothing you're willing to not do in order to attain I don't know what it is, something greater than yourself through the pursuit of making art. But in the process, what might you be giving up? He writes, Joan's guidance is not returning to me. Instead, these are my mentors once more, his parents. Yet still he holds my daughter, he's talking about his father, kisses her cheek. He loves her and watches her for us 2 days a week. I trust him with her. He looks at me and tells me I'm a good father. It's the kindest thing he's ever been able to say about me. And then he goes on here. And yet I've sold him out here to try to prove to you, stranger, that I'm worth something. My father, Lenny Starr, Joan, Liz. Connor's ghost is helpless to speak up except that I translate for him. You have only what I've given you. I confess that there's no one and nothing I wouldn't put into this book if it meant I could make something beautiful and lasting. What does it mean even now that my allegiance is thus? Has it worked? Do you believe me? There's something in that quote about the author being kind of an unreliable narrator in and of themselves. And that's something that I might bring up on the podcast, is that, how much should, I've said to Mum, there are times where I've questioned her perspective. Like, does she have a strong sense of herself? How accurate is her memory? How accurate are any of our memories? But, the same applies to me. How much should I be trusted to sort of account for myself? And what are my motivations? What are my secret motivations? Why am I doing this? I really liked Leadbeater's honesty in considering those points. As to the writing itself, this book, he handles time really well. Something that I think I've mentioned at this point I have an eye out for Mum and I. But he also takes liberties. So he even goes so far as to shift the perspective in chapter 3. And I'm going to talk maybe more to this when we tackle another book that's upcoming, which is Suzanne, which might actually be the next book at this stage. I think I want to do that next. So at the beginning of chapter 3, he moves out of his own perspective and he takes on the perspective looking at his father as a young person. And I'm just going to read a little bit here. On a patch of grass behind a gas station facing the Hudson, a group of small children with too few winter coats are looking up at the December stars over the black water. In the distance, the twin towers steadily hulk. Mist from children's breath catches and then dispels as the eldest boy among them, in thick glasses, not wearing a coat, points at one particularly bright star, blinking, and says, "Is that him?" "No," whispers one of the little girls, his sister. "No way," whispers another. "Oh, of course," the eldest boy says. "What about that one?" "That's the night plane to Texas," one of his little brothers says. "Oh, okay." The eldest boy is my father, and he and his siblings are out behind the family gas station looking for Santa and avoiding their father's nighttime wrath. So obviously, as I just stated, Leadbeater moves out of his own perspective there and reimagines his father as a child. And when we look at Suzanne, what's really fascinating about that book is that it's a fictionalized biography of the author's grandmother. So blurring that line between fiction and non-fiction, blurring that line between creative license, right, and sticking to the facts as known. What's the best way to deliver them? These are all questions that Mum and I are wrestling with in our own writing. One of the things I really like about the Uptown Local, in addition to all the other things I like about it, is the feeling of what I call neighborhood stories. Like it's reminiscent of some of my favorite stories, okay, which do happen to be typically male protagonist coming of age stories, but it's not necessarily gender specific, I don't think. But the Basketball Diaries, which I'm going to do an episode on, I think, or at least I've been considering doing an episode on the Basketball Diaries. A Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, and something, not something else, a very famous book, The Catcher in the Rye, okay? There's sort of aspects of those books inside the Uptown Local. Like there's a kind of as I say, like a neighborhood feel to it. And the book is, it's haunted, on a thematic level, haunted by past, by family, by longing for escape. And Leadbeater within the story is haunted by his own art, his own desire to create art, to write a novel, but also the creation of a fictional character, a protagonist to the novels he's writing, in the form of Billy Silvers is the name of this protagonist. And Billy is kind of pursuing him and haunting him throughout his life. And that's something I think that you might understand if you've written before, where, characters that you create or books that, are on your mind that you would like to write, they kind of dog you. They kind of just follow you around. There's a really funny scene where the author uses a chat bot online to seek advice regarding how to part from his own creation and how to end the relationship between himself and Billy Silvers, which is this really, really funny scene and a funny concept. And the book itself is again this idea of being haunted, being pursued, being dogged by the past, right? Like intergenerational trauma, which Mum and I talk lots about on the podcast, is another theme. So the pain running through each family that shapes their course. And social class, again, is really a big part of this, the way that class impacts an individual person's narrative and the family narrative overall. A feeling of being, the underdogs perhaps, or I don't know what, but the way that social class comes in to define the cultural attitude and disposition of a family. And also there's this repeated suicide motif throughout the book. So Leadbeater lost a close friend to suicide as a young man, a guy called Connor in the book. And Connor keeps coming back up. This is a relatable experience for me. I had a very, very close friend commit suicide, probably my closest friend at the time when I was 20. And yeah, it's if you've ever lost somebody like that, where you've had a really intense friendship or a sibling or something, and they've died young, like you're haunted by that person. Like, you see that person. I find myself still talking to that person even now. But Leadbeater's also haunted by his own suicidal thoughts. Okay, so there's a really great chapter on suicidality, and for people who have had major depression or have experienced suicidal ideation, or made an attempt on their life, there's a lot of relatable writing in this book, and I actually think on suicide, Leadbeater is particularly good. If I can read another section, it might be just the very beginning of chapter 34. And before I read this, I'm also going to say that, like, in terms of being haunted, being pursued, being chased by various things throughout the book, addiction is something else in this book. So losing oneself to alcohol, drugs, but also losing oneself to art. Writing can be sort of an addiction. Like, what are you running away from when you're running into making things? Are you trying to escape? And later, for Cory, alcohol and drugs and are replaced by chess. He becomes obsessed with chess, which I found really funny. Suicide can be about many things, but what it can most often be about is pain. Ineffable pain that has nothing to do really with happiness or unhappiness or even with reality. William Styron, in one of the seminal pieces on suicide, writes, quote, "The pain of severe depression is quite unimaginable to those who have not suffered it, and it kills in many instances because its anguish can no longer be borne." End quote. I like to think of it a different way. Quote, "There was so much that was real that was not real at all," end quote, goes the Stevens line, and this has always struck me as being in some ways the predicament of the suicide. Folks who find reality inadequate are apt to go looking for better or different things elsewhere. In my lifetime, I've sought relief in booze, in books, in self-destructive sexual behavior, in fiction, and, most recently, in chess. Like fiction, chess has no limits. When I play, reality is held at bay for a while. I am even free of having to deal with myself. It actually reminded me, I don't know whether people are familiar with this, but I was never like a huge David Foster Wallace person. Some people are seemingly quite obsessed with him. And he's sort of a cult literary figure, I suppose. But Foster Wallace, I always found, his essays were really good. And I think I preferred his non-fiction to his fiction. But one thing that he wrote, David Foster Wallace wrote, was this incredible encapsulation of suicide, a summary of it. And I wanted to read this on the show at some point, and so I might as well take the opportunity to read it now. It goes like this. The so-called psychotically depressed person who tries to kill herself doesn't do so out of, quote, hopelessness or any abstract conviction that life's assets and debits do not square. And surely not because death seems suddenly appealing. The person in whom its invisible agony reaches a certain unendurable level will kill herself the same way a trapped person will eventually jump from the window of a burning high-rise. Make no mistake about people who leap from burning windows. Their terror of falling from a great height is still just as great as it would be for you or me standing speculatively at the same window just checking out the view, i.e., the fear of falling remains a constant. The variable here is the other terror, the fire's flames. When the flames get close enough, falling to death becomes the slightly less terrible of two terrors. It's not desiring the fall, it's terror of the flames. And yet nobody down on the sidewalk looking up and yelling, "Don't," and "Hang on," can understand the jump. Not really. You'd have to have personally been trapped and felt flames to really understand a terror way beyond falling. I think that's a great summary of suicide. And it's a really good summary of mental illness and depression. That unless you've been through it, unless you've really stood in that place where those flames are starting to lick you, it's unimaginable, really. I mean, suicide seems so kind of out of bounds to a lot of people. Like, how could you do that? How could you want to die? How can you, blah, blah, blah. But it isn't fear of dying, or rather, the suicidal person is not unafraid of dying. They're more afraid of the reality, in Leadbeater's terms, the reality that, is questionable, that they're living through. And I find that really sad. I find that relatable, unfortunately. But, it's true. And if you want, if you want to practice empathy, or, the Stevens line, there was so much that was real that was not real at all. I think that David Foster Wallace's summary there of suicidality and depression is it's good for empathy. It really puts you in the shoes of someone else there. So I thought that was worth reading. Look, that's pretty much all I want to say about the Uptown Local. It's gut-wrenching, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's heartbreaking at times. And it's very relatable to me. I mean, obviously I moved home during the pandemic. We started the BARROW podcast. Leadbeater has this fantastic scene or image where he's talking about his mother reading the books that he's recommending, because he's going off to university, and he's a quite arrogant young man to a certain extent, but again, it's sort of understandable where it's coming from. He's trying to create distance. He's trying to create a hierarchy, and carve out an identity for himself, as young people do. But there's this very beautiful and sweet evocation of the mother, where she's battling her exhaustion to read Cory's book recommendations. And it just got me thinking, the mother's effort to understand her son, it's so powerful, and it's a powerful idea generally, a mother's effort to understand her child. And of course, Mum has been on this show and in my life been supporting me in silent ways for years, and of course she's now going to great lengths for this show and to create something with me. And it's worth stating that it should be obvious that I'm grateful, but I am very grateful, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm just going to have a sip of water. And I'm just going to wrap up here with with a couple more recommendations. So on the topic of Joan Didion, I've also been flicking through this, which is The World According to Joan Didion by Evelyn McDonnell. And this is really kind of a companion reader for Didion. I'm just going to read the blurb again, so you have a sense of what it is, as well as the author bio. So first of all, Evelyn McDonnell has written or co-edited 8 books, including Women Who Rock, Bessie to Beyonce, Girl Gossips to Riot Girl, and Queens of Noise, the real story of the Runaways. She's been a pop culture writer at the Miami Herald and a senior editor at the Village Voice. Her writing has appeared in anthologies and publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Los Angeles Times, Ms. and Billboard. She teaches journalism at Loyola Marymount University and lives in San Pedro, California. Okay, so she's a journalist, sort of an academic, and as I say, The World According to Joan Didion is a companion. If you're a Didion fan, it's worth checking out. It's all about how good Joan Didion is and her writing and her writing style. Okay, I'll just read the blurb. An intimate exploration of the life, craft, and legacy of one of the most revered and influential writers of the last century. Joan Didion was a writer's writer, not only a groundbreaking journalist, essayist, novelist, and screenwriter, but a keen observer who honed her craft, discerning life's telling details. Her insights continue to influence her readers, encouraging them to become close observers of the world, unsentimental critics, and meticulous stylists. The World According to Joan Didion is a meditation on the people, places, and objects that propelled Didion's prose, and an invitation to journalists, storytellers, and life adventurers to, quote, throw themselves into the convulsions of the world, end quote, as she once said. Evelyn McDonnell, the acclaimed journalist and critic, is attuned to interpret Didion's vision for her readers today, inspired by Didion's own words and informed by the people whose lives she shaped. The World According to Joan Didion is an illustrated journey through her life, tracing the path she carved from Sacramento, Portuguese Bend, Los Angeles, and Malibu to Manhattan, Miami, and Hawaii. One of the first books on Didion to be published after the revered writer's death in 2021. This is an illuminating and insightful exploration into Joan Didion's life and a must-have literary companion for those wanting to learn from one of the world's most iconic writers. I can't recommend this enough. I really encourage people to go and grab that in addition to in addition to Didion's work itself, and I really recommend and encourage people to go out and get the Uptown Local. I mean, like, you know, these are great. These are great for Didion fans, but they're really good books in their own right. And what else was I going to say? Well, oh yeah, that's right. You know, I also have another recommendation. It's the last thing I'm going to do on today's episode, but the insight that you get with the Uptown Local, just a tiny little bit here on Didion herself. You know, like, it's one thing to enjoy an author, but you know, it's rare. Like, the people that live with them don't always write about them, and they're kind of the voices and the perspectives I want, you know, where it's somebody in relation to that person. Joan was a survivor, tougher than all of us put together. Suicide would have been antithetical to her nature, and yet her father flirted with it all his life, something she's written about. And I wonder if the degree to which she saw the clear truth of life didn't also mean She was intimately acquainted with death long before her husband or daughter died. The old cliche, when you see through to the truth of things, the only thing left to do is to die of it, may have applied better to Didion, the writer, than any other 20th century American. The burden of what she knew, the burden of possessing a mind that capacious. It's the one thing she may never have adequately told us, what it was like to be her. Incapable of accepting any orthodoxy or received idea, she lived all her life in a state of uncertainty. It's how she knew the Central Park Five were innocent, but also why she could not make it through a single day without a wildly detailed schedule. I thought that was a key little bit of insight, that for all the writing that a person does, they may never actually really capture themselves. You have to turn to the people nearest them to maybe flesh that stuff out. Which brings me to my final recommendation, another really good memoir that I've come across on this journey so far. And also why I like this one is because it uses short chapters. Okay, so again, you know, for what Mum and I are doing, I'm really obsessed with vignettes. I'm really obsessed with short chapters. It's something I really, really, really like. And there's going to be even more about this on the next book, Suzanne, the upcoming book that we're doing by, I can never say the first name, Anais Barbeau-Lavalette. If you're listening along to our podcast and you want to read along, maybe that's something I can do, is sort of put up things before we get to them. It's not always easy for me to do that because things change, but yeah, that's the next one anyway. So if you want to go out and grab it and read it before we talk about it, that would be that could be a good idea to do that. So anyway, the last recommendation is this book here. It's called Insomniac City, okay? And it's by a guy called Bill Hayes. Insomniac City, New York, Oliver and Me, okay? Again, I'm just going to read the author bio and the blurb, and then we're going to get out of here for today. But, oh yeah, I want to show people, so obviously you can watch our shows on our YouTube channel. But yeah, I just want to take the cover off here. So I've got a hardback. I'm just taking the jacket off the book. The jacket's got these little square holes in it that give a glimpse of what's on the hard cover. And when you fold it out, it's this really beautiful, I don't know whether the camera's picking that up yet or not. It's this really beautiful photograph. And Bill Hayes is a photographer in addition to being a writer. And his photography appears in this book. And this is just a really beautiful item that I have. The book itself is lovely. Like I don't know the technical terms for the way that things are laid out, but you know, it's really high quality paper, and it's a real textural experience touching this book and leafing through it and reading it. It's really immersive. It's beautiful, and his photography is actually, it's beautiful. You know, I love, he takes these pictures. Again, I don't know whether the camera can pick that up, but I'm sure you can find his website online and look at his photographs. But these beautiful photos of tree branches shot from beneath the tree up into the sky, and they're just, they're reprinted here in black and white, but they're just gorgeous. Anyway, let me read a few things about this book so you know what it is, and I'll tell you also why I recommend this book. So Bill Hayes is the author of The Anatomist,
5 Quarts and Sleep Demons. He is a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Nonfiction and has been a visiting scholar at the American Academy in Rome. He is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and his writing has appeared in the New York Review of Books and Salon, among other publications. His photographs have been featured in Vanity Fair, the New York Times, and the New Yorker. He lives in New York. Visit his website at billhayes.com. That's Hayes, Hayes. And let me read the blurb. So, a moving celebration of what Bill Hayes calls, quote, the evanescent, the eavesdropped, the unexpected, end quote, of life in New York City, and an intimate glimpse of his relationship with the late Oliver Sacks. Now, some of you may know who Oliver Sacks is. You can look him up. This is why I'm recommending this book today. I'll get to that in a second. Bill Hayes came to New York City in 2009 with a one-way ticket and only the vaguest idea of how he would get by. But at 48 years old, and I find that so inspiring that at 48 years old you move and recreate your life. Good for you, Bill. But at 48 years old, having spent decades in San Francisco, he craved change. Grieving over the death of his partner, he quickly discovered the profound consolations of the city's incessant rhythms, the sight of the Empire State Building against the night sky, and New Yorkers themselves, kindred souls that Hayes, a lifelong insomniac, encountered on late-night strolls with his camera. And he unexpectedly fell in love again with his friend and neighbour, the writer and neurologist Oliver Sacks, whose exuberance, quote, I don't so much fear death as I do wasting life, end quote, he tells Hayes early on, is captured in funny and touching vignettes throughout. What emerges is a portrait of Sacks at his most personal and endearing, from falling in love for the first time at age 75 to facing illness and death. Sacks died of cancer in August 2015. Insomniac City is both a meditation on grief and a celebration of life. Filled with Hayes' distinctive street photos of everyday New Yorkers, the book is a love song to the city and to all who have felt the particular magic and solace it offers. Okay, so why this book? Okay, and I want to defend myself a little bit here because I know I'm going American heavy and I'm going New York heavy recently. But look, I thought it was thematic that we do a bit in New York. Blue Nights is set in New York. The Uptown Local is obviously set in New York because it's with Joan, and this is set in New York. And because Hayes' relationship with Oliver Sacks is much like, well, it's a different, the nature of the relationship is different, but again, it's that personal perspective on a huge cultural icon. Oliver Sacks is, he might be like really famous to some people. Other people might not know him, but he was a giant. Well, he was a giant. He was an incredible cultural icon and another, a New York figure. And so Hayes has this relationship with Oliver Sacks, and you get that insider look. Same Leadbeater has that, caring for Didion, and Sacks and Didion, these aging intellects, these monumental cultural figures, and these books deliver unique insider perspectives, and I think that's worth noting. And I found Insomniac City, I'm still reading it, to be honest with you, and I kind of don't want it to end. I enjoy just having a chapter here and there. It's like a little bit of dessert. I find it really inspiring. I find it really uplifting. I as I said just then, Hayes reinventing his life at the age of 48. As someone who feels frequently defeated by life, I'm impressed and uplifted by people who are decisive and take action. And it fills me with hope and optimism. So for all those reasons, I recommend Insomniac City by Bill Hayes. Hayes. That's it from me. It's definitely it from me, because now Kingsley is clawing at the door trying to get in here with me. Give me a second here, Cass. I've got to get the cat. I've got to deal with the cat. Hello, buddy. Yeah, Cass, you might just want to cut this last little bit out. I think I'm just going to do a recommendation and for an episode of another podcast where I was a guest, and that can finish things off here. Last thing I wanted to say today, some of these books reminded me of a conversation I was having actually before Mum and I launched this podcast. I was a guest on someone else's show, which is the Getting Lit podcast, hosted and created, but now co-hosted by Matt Sinney. Definitely check that episode out. I'm going to link it below if you want to check it out. It's an extra episode of me talking about process and talking about some of the things that Mum and I have been doing. So, you can find the link in the description in today's episode. Thanks again for listening, and see you next week. Bye. Thanks, guys. Cheers.